All right, now, and I'm going to try not to mess up your name, Natalie. It's my
No
reputation is
worries.
I always mess up names. It's Chmiko.
Chimiko, yeah.
Chmiko. Got it. Okay, I was
Yep.
I was looking at that, and I got we're missing some vowels here
I
somewhere.
know. I
So
know.
yes. Well, let me introduce you, and as you know, I can see Odie's with us too. Odie and I have known each other forever,
Yeah.
and I've been covering manufacturing or working in manufacturing for probably a little over 40 years. So I'm pretty familiar with that whole area. And one of the things that our audience may not be familiar with the term, I've discovered several people I've talked to suddenly go, "What's Industry 4.0?" Why don't you define that for us to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So Industry 4.0 is really the convergence of the digital and the physical technologies. So, digitization within the manufacturing sector. And Industry 4.0 is actually a collection of about 8 emerging technology sectors. So it can be like additive manufacturing, like a 3D printer, or it can be AI, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, cybersecurity, modeling, simulation, sorry, can't talk,
Easy for you to say, yeah.
robotics, and then Internet of Things.
Yeah, it's a lot of different things, and as I mentioned to Odie, that I've been actually researching this since the December MEDC conference you had in Detroit. I wanted to dig deeper into this to see where we are in Michigan. It's a very
Yeah.
ambitious program. You have a very ambitious plan, 6,200 manufacturers to some degree embracing Industry 4.0 over the next 2 years. Um, and at last I knew there was roughly 12,000 manufacturers in Michigan. Now that number may have changed a bit, but the ballpark figures. Now, one of the things, and I was talking to someone that works with LTU, Scott Phillips, you probably know at the Industry 4.0 Accelerator, and he was showing me some charts where he thought maybe roughly a third of the manufacturers were embracing Industry 4.0 to some degree. Not certainly as much as the OEMs. I already talked to GM about what they're doing. I talked to Toyota. I've talked to a lot of the big players, talked to some tier ones. Um, those folks have a lot of money. So to them, that's no big deal to do it. But for a lot of the tier twos, I already talked to the Manufacturing Growth Alliance, which represents the tier twos. And there's a lot of pushback there because the tier twos just don't have the money. I mean, they may have the inclination. So it's just a long setup. But if we're only around 3,000 or 4,000 manufacturers, and we need to add 2,000 more, so in the next 2 years to reach your goal, how do we do that? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. So we are kind of taking a really, multi-pronged approach. So we're working with statewide partners. We're working with key players, Automation Alley, who is a leader in this space in Industry 4.0. They're kind of the knowledge convener. Then we've got Michigan Manufacturing Technology Center. They're out working with small manufacturers day in and day out to help spread the word and actually do technology assessments with the companies and help them define which is right for them, which Industry 4.0 technology is right for them. And then, like you mentioned, a couple regional players like MGA, Networks Northwest, and some all across the state that are actually going out and spreading this word regionally. So we've kind of got the education feelers out. We're trying to spread the word, but we certainly need additional help to get there. But you mentioned, cost is really a barrier, and that's why we developed this implementation grant. So Industry 4.0 implementation grant. So it gives $25,000 in a grant. It's a matching grant. They have to come up with, 50,000 to get 25 back, and to implement a technology. So that's the cost of equipment. That's the cost of hiring someone to actually put it in their facility, and all of that. So that was part of the reason and the impetus for creating that program. And we've had a phenomenal success so far.
Let me, I don't want to play the devil's advocate, but I have been talking to a lot of people. So let me do it anyway, because that's usually what I do. 25,000 is great. However, again, going back to Elizabeth at the Manufacturing Growth Alliance, she said it needs to be about 6 times that to make it effective. And I know this is probably another area you don't want to touch on, but I'm very much aware that we're sitting on a $9 billion surplus in the state of Michigan. And I know this is more of a Whitmer political question, but I mean, is there any chance of some of that money being funneled to manufacturing so that Michigan can remain the manufacturing hub of the United States?
That's a really important point. And I know that this is something, as you mentioned, we are manufacturing. We are the, epicenter for manufacturing across the world. And so we really need to continue to focus our economic development activities in supporting manufacturers, especially the small manufacturers who are really driving our economy. As far as additional dollars, we continue to advocate for additional funding to support programs like this. And we hope to see it grow in the future because we realize that this is really a need. And I think we saw from, kind of our first round of getting these grants out the door, they were gobbled up within, 5 months.
Just poof, they were gone,
So we recognize that this is really something that we hope to scale in the future. And we continue to advocate on that.
Okay, Matt, I've been dominating this. I know you have questions. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I just wanted to make sure you were aware of. I'm the PR guy for Lawrence Tech to briefly describe what
formerly
I do.
WWJ Glitter and all that jazz. So he does have journalistic credentials. So
and Cranes before that.
And Cranes before that. Yes.
Yeah. But we here at Lawrence Tech just dedicated a new laboratory that was donated to us by Rockwell Automation and installed by McNaughton McKay, and it's as you might expect, it's called the Rockwell McNaughton McKay Industry 4.0 Lab. What we've got is a big steel safety cage with 3 KUKA industrial robots in it and a moving assembly line that can simulate manufacturing processes like putting parts together and welding and things like that, and also some pick and pack stuff for warehouse operations. And it's all controlled by Rockwell software, and we have a digital twin of that assembly line online so students can try out what they want to do with the assembly line before taking it to the actual assembly line in case it doesn't work, in case there's adjacency problems or moving problems or something like that. But there are, I'm sure there's other academic institutions that are also dealing with this. I was just curious, what is your relationship between this effort and sort of the academic side of things? We changed the name of our mechanical engineering department to the Mechanical Robotics and Industrial Engineering Department because we realized that's so much more an important part of mechanical engineering these days. So are you reaching out to educational institutions? Are you trying to get companies to visit laboratories like ours, to try to get them more familiar with these technologies?
Yeah, I think, seeing that technology in play is really, it's one thing to talk about it, especially in these, jargon terms, Industry 4.0 and things like that, but to actually see how it can help their processes for their specific issue, that is really key to help driving that decision-making for future investments for them. In terms of educational, obviously with Lawrence Tech, we have partnership, with Centropolis at LTU.
Sure. Yep.
And they're doing the Industry 4.0 Accelerator for us. We're actually having our stakeholder meeting there. And I kind of mentioned the partners that are involved in this and really the stakeholders that we bring together. We want to constantly be educating them as well. So we're going to be doing a tour while we're there, kind of seeing the setup that you have over at LTU. We've done similar things at LIFT and at IACME and MMTC as well. And so really we're just, trying to educate ourselves so that we can continue to move this initiative forward. I think there's still certainly opportunity on the educational front to partner with universities. And that's something I think we're willing to explore further.
Yeah, Centropolis is one of the real jewels, I think, on this campus. They've helped now 375 companies, 400 new jobs, $80 million in investment. Of the companies they've helped, the vast majority of them manufacturers, the vast majority of them here in Michigan. And there's also in that lab some technology from a startup here in Oak Park called Detect It. And they have worked out really cool AI technology where you could take a look at how you could take pictures of a properly operating assembly line. You could even take sound sound recordings of what a properly operating assembly line is supposed to sound like. And if it deviates from how that looks or how that even sounds, it can sound an alarm that you're about to have quality problems, you're about to have machinery problems. And they have done this in a really cost-effective way. I think maybe some of these smaller manufacturers think that a lot of this stuff is more expensive than it really has to be.
Absolutely. I mean, there are solutions out there. I mean, with technology evolving so much in the manufacturing space, I mean, you can buy a sensor and throw it on your machine for really pretty inexpensive investment up front. You can buy a 3D printer that's just going to do prototyping, and it's not a huge investment. So what we're trying to do is help make this easy to navigate, and understanding that there's a learning curve, right? They need, manufacturers are really, they want to see the ROI. They're not just going to throw money at things. And
Precisely. Yeah, precisely.
So I think it's important for them to kind of see and test things out and really kind of create that culture, that innovative culture, that it's okay to make, maybe an inexpensive mistake versus investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in technology that really isn't going to move the needle for them. And so really that's where these experts across the state are really trying to help companies understand which investments are going to turn the best ROI, but also help their capacity constraints, their labor. I mean, there's so many reasons why implementing these technologies. I mean, you mentioned maintenance issues, downtime. I mean, there's so many reasons why these technologies can help a manufacturer and help them grow and thrive long term.
In my conversations with them, I know it's a hard sell when you don't have the money, but I was saying to them, well, this is going to make you a lot more efficient. That's going to drive down your costs. You're going to be much more nimble and agile. But it gets back to your point. I mean, you got to show me. I mean, if I'm going to spend all this money, I got to know there's something in it. Because normally they only spend money to increase revenues. The idea of spending money to decrease cost, not something they're really used to, right?
Can I share a stat with you? So we have 134 grants. So, a good amount of grants under our belt at this point. We've sent out about $3 million in grant awards for companies that are actually making these investments. On the applications, the amount of revenue that they said they'd increase as a total of those 134 was $150 million of increase in revenue estimated. They also estimated about 600 jobs created, about 2,400 jobs retained. And not only that, this $3 million also leveraged $17.5 million of private investment from these small manufacturers. So the ones that are doing this program, it's just that extra little push to move, to get them over the edge to make this decision. But as you mentioned earlier, I mean, these investments are much larger, but there's a huge potential impact on their bottom line.
Sure. One final thing, and just again, may not be your area, but I just want you to, as I'm doing this series, I'm going to have a multi-part series. One of the things that I talked to GM about, because it's come up, the ISO 9000, they couldn't get people to implement that without mandating it. So I said to GM, are you thinking about saying to them, if you don't go Industry 4.0, we're not going to work with you? And that was a resounding no, because they're having a tough enough time keeping all their suppliers on board as it is. And the idea of mandating it was just not something that they thought would fly very well. Any thoughts on that?
That is a really interesting point. I mean, this may not be mandated, but if you think about how GM and some of these other OEMs are looking at their supply chain, I mean, they're investing in 3D printing. They're investing in ways to, in some cases, make some of their supply chain not as needed, and maybe even obsolete long term if they can kind of get, economies of scale and things like that. So part of the reason why we think this is so important for the state to invest in is that from a long-term perspective, these companies, this legacy manufacturing within the state of Michigan, we need to really be thinking strategically about how we can be creative, continue to diversify and find new ways of operating and find new, revenue streams ultimately, where these supply chains are in kind of a state of flux.
And one final thought, in some of my research, how do I say this gently, since I'm of the manufacturing, they're not exactly really, I mean, the top peers they have a lot of money, but the smaller ones are like third generation family owned factories, things like that. Yeah. And so there's been some talk that Industry 4.0, well, we'd like the auto industry to do it, but there's other industries out there, medical devices, green energy, that are much more receptive to the idea of embracing new technologies. Any comments on that?
Yeah, one of the, I think, struggles that we have as a state, I mentioned that legacy manufacturing knowledge and know-how. You would think that's like the best, that's the best experience you can have, right? But in some cases, it's holding us back, because you see these companies that start out as a technology company that then go into manufacturing and figure it out, and add technology, use technology along the way. And are able to ramp up more quickly sometimes than a legacy manufacturer that is really just trying to, be more efficient and have additional technologies into their processes. So the legacy is great, but I think we need to continue to push people kind of past their, their comfort level of some of that, that know-how that they have, to kind of really think about how this is going to shift their culture and where their business is going to be in 5, 10, 15, 30 years. Because technology is not going away. If anything, it's going to continue to rapidly push the needle, move the needle. And, these companies have to really get on board. And now's the time to take advantage of these great resources.